Dad, you are a burden on me. The words hit me like a slap to the face, and I froze. I had barely stepped through the front door when Sarah, my daughter, looked me squarely in the eyes and said it. No hesitation, no compassion, just cold, hard words that shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. I blinked, trying to process what had just happened. My heart sank, my breath caught in my throat. She had said it so matter-of-factly, as if it were the simplest thing in the world, as if it were nothing but a fact to her. The daughter I had raised, the girl I had once held in my arms, was now telling me I was a burden. Michael, her fiancé, was sitting next to her, his hands folded neatly in his lap. He didn't even flinch at Sarah's words. In fact, he looked like he was about to offer his own set of concerned words. "We've been talking, Dad," he began, his voice smooth and controlled like a salesman pushing a deal. "The house, it's just too much for you. You're getting older, and there's all the maintenance. We think it's time for you to move." I stared at him, stunned. "Move," I croaked, barely able to form words. He nodded, not missing a beat. "Yeah, maybe into a smaller place, something more manageable. A retirement community, maybe. It would be easier for you. You wouldn't have to worry about the upkeep anymore." The shock was almost unbearable. My heart was hammering in my chest, and I could feel my body tense up. I had just lost Elizabeth a few weeks ago. My life had been turned upside down, and now, in the midst of my grief, my own daughter and her fiancé were offering me a solution that felt more like a sentence. The home I had built with Elizabeth, the very place where we had poured our dreams and love, was being reduced to a burden in their eyes. "Dad, we said you're just trying to help," Sarah continued, her tone still too calm, too detached. "You've done so much for this house, but you said you're not getting any younger. You need to think about what is best for you." Her words were like daggers, each one twisting deeper. I'm not getting any younger. How could she say that? I felt myself bristle, my mind racing. This house wasn't just bricks and wood. It was the sum of my life's work. It was the place where Elizabeth and I had built a family, where every corner held a memory. And yet here they were, talking about it like it was just a thing to be discarded. Michael leaned in, speaking more earnestly now. "We even had a contractor come by to give us a quote for repairs," he said, his voice smooth like oil. "We know it's a lot of work, and we don't want you to have to deal with it anymore. It's for your own good, Dad. We to take care of it." My eyes flicked to the folder he was holding. A contractor's quote. I opened it, my hand shaking. The repairs they were talking about were staggering. New roof, plumbing work, foundation fixes. The total came to an astronomical number. "It's going to be a lot of money," Michael said, as if it were a generous offer, "but we'll cover it for you. Think of it as a contribution to the family." I looked at the date on the quote, mid-October. Elizabeth had died on November 1st. They had been planning this before she was even gone, while I was still by her side in the hospital. They had already begun plotting how to take the house from me. The bitter realization hit me like a slap across the face. They weren't offering me help, they were offering me an eviction notice. The walls of the living room seemed to close in around me. The room that had once been filled with laughter, with love, with life, now felt cold. It was as though they were already treating it as theirs, assuming they could take what wasn't theirs to take. The thought that my own daughter, the person I had devoted my life to, could be so callous. It was a wound that went deep. The words echoed in my mind. "You stir a burden." I tried to steady myself, but the anger was rising within me. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but I couldn't. Instead, I stood up, my hands trembling. "I don't need your charity," I said, my voice low and steady, though my heart was anything but calm. "This is my home, and it's not yours to take." Sarah and Michael both looked at me with a mixture of surprise and confusion, as if they hadn't expected me to resist. They thought I would cave in, that I would welcome their help. "Dad," Sarah began again, her voice soft but insistent, "we said are just trying to make things easier for you." The final blow came when I glanced at the framed photo of Elizabeth on the mantel. I saw her smile, her warmth, the woman who had been the love of my life. A wave of grief washed over me. but it was quickly followed by a surge of anger. How dare they try to take what she and I had built? How dare they strip away the very foundation of my life, just to make room for their own plans? With a clenched jaw, I turned and walked out the door. I couldn't stay there any longer, not with them looking at me like that, as if I were just some inconvenience to be discarded. I stepped into the cold, biting air, my chest tight with a mixture of grief and fury. I wasn't just mourning the loss of Elizabeth anymore. I was mourning the loss of my dignity, my life, my legacy. My daughter had just declared me a burden, and that was the moment I knew. I would not let them take this from me. I would fight. The days following that conversation felt like they moved in slow motion. I stayed in the house, but it was no longer the same. The place that had once felt like a sanctuary now felt like a battleground, my every step weighed down by the bitterness of betrayal. Sarah and Michael didn't stop calling. At first it was all checking in and how are you feeling. The phone calls came at regular intervals, their voices syrupy sweet, feigning concern. But I saw through it. I could feel the pressure behind their words, the underlying push like they were trying to wear me down. "How are you holding up, Dad?" Sarah Sip's voice would ring out over the phone, too bright, too forced. "You doing okay? Have you been getting enough rest? We want you to be comfortable, you know." Each time, I told her I was fine, though it wasn't entirely true. I wasn't fine. I was angry, hurt, and devastated. But I wasn't about to let her see that. I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of seeing me weak. I avoided talking to Michael as much as I could. His voice was always the same, slick, smooth, full of practiced concern. Every word he spoke felt like a calculated move in a game I didn't want to play. Then, one evening after another call that left me more frustrated than before, I noticed something new. The kitchen was colder than usual, and the air felt stifling. It wasn't the chill of the autumn evening. It was something else. I walked into the kitchen and froze. Sitting next to the old dishwasher, still wrapped in plastic, was a brand new one. A receipt was tucked behind it. My heart sank as I read the numbers scrawled across the bill. $2,800. It was too much for a dishwasher. Too much for any appliance. I hadn't ordered it. I hadn't even been consulted. It was as if Sarah and Michael had just gone ahead and made the decision for me, assuming I wouldn't mind. They'd been in my house without my permission, making repairs, spending money on things they thought I needed but never asked for. It wasn't just a dishwasher. It was an invasion. They were already treating my home like it belonged to them. I stood there for a long time, staring at the new appliance, feeling the anger bubble up inside me. The house, the one I had built with Elizabeth, the one filled with our memories, was being slowly taken from me. It wasn't just about the dishwasher. It was about the way they were slowly erasing me, trying to strip away everything I held dear. And then there was the paint job in the living room, half finished, like someone had come in, painted a wall, and left it. There was no explanation, no consent, just more changes being made to my home, changes that made me feel less welcome, less wanted. The next day, I was sifting through some old boxes in my office when I stumbled across something that made my stomach drop. It was Elizabeth's iPad, still logged into her account. The screen lit up, and a message from Sarah popped up. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. The message was short, but it hit me like a ton of bricks. "He's a burden, Mike. The sooner we get him out, the sooner we can start our lives here." The words blurred before my eyes. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to throw the iPad across the room, but I couldn't move. My daughter, my flesh and blood, had been plotting behind my back, waiting for the right moment to take everything from me. The betrayal was deeper than I had imagined. It wasn't just the house they were after. It was me. They saw me as nothing but a hurdle, something to be cleared. I sat there for hours, staring at the screen, the weight of the words pressing on my chest. How had it come to this? How had the people I loved so much become the ones who sought to destroy me? But then I looked up. There, on the mantel, was a framed photo of Elizabeth, laughing in the sun, her hair blowing in the wind. It was from our anniversary trip to Italy, the last vacation we'd taken together. Her smile was the brightest thing in the room, and for a moment it grounded me. It reminded me of what I still had. It reminded me that this house, this life, was worth fighting for. The fire that had started in my chest the day Sarah called me a burden began to burn hotter. It wasn't just grief anymore. It was a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't going to let them take this from me. I wasn't going to be forced out of my own home. I knew what I had to do. I had to stand up. I had to fight for what was mine, for what Elizabeth and I had built together. I couldn't do it alone. And so I made the decision. The next day, I would take the first step toward reclaiming my life. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but now it was channeled into something more focused, something more dangerous. I had been passive long enough. I had let them walk over me, let them take advantage of my grief, but not anymore. I got dressed and made my way out of the house. The crisp fall air bit at my skin, but it felt different now. It felt like the start of something. I had made up my mind I was going to take back control of my life. I was going to fight for the house, our house, and for the dignity they had tried to strip away. I drove to the lawyer's office. It was a small brick building tucked away in an industrial part of town, far from the polished glass towers where high-powered attorneys usually held court. The scent of old paper and dust greeted me as I walked into the office. It was a place that had seen a lot of cases, a lot of people desperate for help. It felt right. Mr. Davies, the lawyer I had found after researching elder financial abuse cases, was sitting behind a cluttered desk when I walked in. His office had an old-school charm to it. Shelves filled with legal books, a small globe in the corner, and a low lamp that gave the room a warm glow despite the gray, overcast day outside. "Mr. Collins," he greeted me, his deep voice calm, reassuring. "Please take a seat." I sat across from him, my hands clenched in my lap. He didn't ask for details yet. He simply waited for me to speak. I appreciated that. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted action. "I am here to fight." I began, my voice low but steady. "I am here to fight for my home. My daughter and her fiancé are trying to take everything from me. They want me out of the house. I can let that happen." Mr. Davies leaned forward slightly, his eyes sharp and attentive. He had been in the business long enough to know when a case wasn't just about money, it was about something deeper. "Tell me everything," he said simply. I took a deep breath and began. I told him about the phone calls, the contractor's quote, the subtle threats, and the final blow. The text message from Sarah calling me a burden. I showed him the fake quote from the contractor, and the receipts for the repairs they had started without my consent. I didn't leave out a single detail. I needed him to see how serious this was. After listening to everything, Mr. Davies sat back in his chair, his face unreadable. He didn't seem surprised by the extent of Sarah and Michael's actions. In fact, I could almost sense a quiet satisfaction in the way he processed the information. "This is a clear case of elder financial abuse," he said, after a long pause. "Your daughter and her fiancé have been manipulating you, using your grief to their advantage. What they've done is not only morally wrong, it's illegal." The words felt like a weight lifting from my shoulders. Hearing it from a professional made it feel real. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't being paranoid. They had crossed a line. Mr. Davies continued, his tone practical and focused. "We need to act quickly. First, we said he'll gather all the evidence you have. Emails, receipts, text messages. We said he'll also need to get a forensic accountant involved to track their spending on the house. This will strengthen your case." I nodded, determined. "What about the house? What can we do to stop them from making any more changes?" "They have already started renovations without my permission. We'll send them a cease and desist letter, a formal demand to stop all work on the property. We'll also request that they provide an accounting of any money they've spent without your authorization. If they refuse, we'll take legal action. But most importantly, we'll start with getting a restraining order. I recommend we change the locks as soon as possible." The idea of changing the locks gave me a sense of relief. It was a simple action, but it felt like a small victory. It would be my way of taking back control. "Let Semps do it," I said firmly. "Let Semps send the letter. Let Semps change the locks." Mr. Davies smiled, though it wasn't satisfaction. It was a professional, measured smile. the kind that only a seasoned attorney could give. We settle move fast. You one set us have to worry about them entering the property again. After finalizing the plan, I left his office feeling like a different man. The weight on my chest, the sense of helplessness had started to lift. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had a path forward. The next day, I called a locksmith and had the locks changed on both the front and back doors. The feeling of holding those new keys in my hand was almost surreal. I had taken the first step in reclaiming my life, and it felt damn good. That evening, I drafted the cease and desist letter with Mr. Davies' guidance, a clear and direct message to Sarah and Michael that their unauthorized actions would no longer be tolerated. I had them send it via certified mail so there would be a record of when they received it. The letter stated that they were not to enter the property again without my permission, and that they were required to stop any work or repairs they had begun. The sense of action, the sense of control, began to replace the dread I had been carrying. I knew the battle wasn't over. This was just the beginning, but I was ready. I had taken the first step, and I wasn't going to stop until I had reclaimed what was mine. The days after I changed the locks were strangely quiet. I hadn't heard from Sarah or Michael since the certified letter was delivered. The silence was unnerving, but I knew it was only a matter of time before they came back, demanding answers or trying to find another way to get what they thought was owed to them. I had prepared for this, though. I was no longer going to be passive. I was going to fight for my home and my dignity, and I wasn't going to let them take it from me. I spent the next few days gathering everything I could. I went through old boxes, sorting through receipts, documents, anything that could support my case. My hands trembled as I looked through the papers, but I knew it had to be done. Every document, every text, every bill was another piece of the puzzle I needed to build my defense. The house wasn't just bricks and wood. It was the legacy of my life with Elizabeth. It was worth fighting for. Then came the real confrontation. A few days after I changed the locks, Sarah showed up at the house unannounced. I wasn't surprised. I had been expecting it. She was relentless, and I knew she wouldn't back down easily. She stood on the porch, her face tight with frustration as she rang the doorbell. I didn't answer right away. I wasn't ready to let her in yet. I wanted to make sure I had everything in place before this moment arrived. After a few minutes, she started calling my phone, and I let it ring until the voicemail kicked in. She didn't leave a message. Instead, she started pounding on the door, her fists hitting the wood with a force that told me she was angry. I stood in the hallway, listening to her, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. Finally, I walked to the door and opened it. Sarah stood there, her arms crossed, her posture defensive. Her eyes narrowed as she looked me up and down. "Dad, what the hell is going on?" she demanded. "Why did you change the locks? What's this all about?" I stood there, calm but firm, and looked her in the eyes. "I said taking control of my life, Sarah. I said not going to be treated like a burden anymore." She stepped back, clearly taken aback by my response. For a moment I thought she might argue, but instead, her voice softened, though it was laced with anger. "You're being unreasonable. We're just trying to help you. You're old, and this house is too much for you to handle. We want what's best for you." I shook my head. "No, Sarah. You want what sits best for you. This house isn't sit for you to take. It sips mine, and it always has been. I built it with Elizabeth. It sips a part of me, and I sips not going to let you steal it from me." Her eyes flashed with frustration, but she held back. For a moment, we stood there in silence, the weight of our words hanging in the air between us. "This isn't over," she said, finally, turning on her heel and walking back to her car without another word. I watched her leave, the knot in my chest loosening slightly. I knew this wouldn't be the end of it. I knew they would find another way to fight, but for the first time, I felt like I had made a stand. I had taken control, and no matter what happened next, I wasn't going to back down. Later that afternoon, I met with Mr. Davies again. He had been handling the legal side of things, drafting the necessary documents, and preparing the case. I needed his expertise more than ever. We went over the details of the case, checking off the steps I had taken so far. We had the cease and desist letter, the locks changed, and a solid record of all the unauthorized repairs Sarah and Michael had initiated without my consent. We had evidence, and now we needed to use it. We'll file for a temporary restraining order next, Mr. Davies said. That will keep them from coming near the house again. We'll also move forward with the financial investigation. We need to show that they've been spending money on this property without your approval. This is their biggest mistake, James. They've treated you like you don't matter, but you matter. This is your life, your home, and you're not going to let them take it. I nodded, my resolve hardening with each word he said. The more I listened, the more I realized that this was bigger than just protecting the house. This was about showing Sarah and Michael that their entitlement had a price, and they were going to pay it. The next few days were a blur. There were meetings with the forensic accountant, calls to the courthouse to file for the restraining order, and more paperwork than I had ever seen in my life. But it was all necessary. The more steps I took, the more I felt like I was gaining back the control I had lost. And then, a few days later, I received a call that made my heart skip a beat. It was from my real estate agent, Mark, the same agent who had helped Elizabeth and me buy the house all those years ago. James, he said, his voice calm but urgent, I've got some offers for your house. People are interested. My heart raced. This was it, the moment when I could truly take back control. I had been planning to sell the house all along, but now that I had the legal leverage, I could do it on my own terms. I could take the power away from Sarah and Michael. I had all ready, I told him, my voice steady. Let's list it. The following weeks felt like an intricate dance, each step calculated, each move precise. The initial shock of Sarah's and Michael's betrayal had worn off, replaced by a deep, unwavering resolve. I was not just defending my home. I was reclaiming my life, my dignity, and the legacy Elizabeth and I had built together. They had thought I would fold. They thought I would cave under pressure, but I was stronger than they had ever given me credit for. After I made the decision to list the house, things began to move quickly. Mark, my real estate agent, was a seasoned professional. He understood the sentimental value of the property and handled everything with care. The house, with its classic design, mature landscaping, and sweeping views of the city, was more than just a home, it was a treasure. We set a competitive asking price, based on the appraisals I had completed with Mr. Davies. The Seattle housing market was red hot, and I knew that once the house was listed, it would sell quickly. But there was something deeper motivating me now. This wasn't just a real estate transaction. This was an act of reclaiming control. The house was a symbol of my life with Elizabeth, and I wouldn't let it fall into the wrong hands. As the listing went live, I felt a mix of emotions. There was a sense of liberation, of finally taking action, but there was also a deep sadness. This house, this home that had been the center of my universe for decades, was no longer mine. It was a chapter closing, and with it a part of me was letting go, but it was necessary. The first few offers came in quickly, each one slightly higher than the last. I was pleasantly surprised. The house, with all its charm and history, was in high demand. I reviewed the offers with Mark, weighing the pros and cons. Some were more aggressive than others, but one stood out. A young couple eager to buy, willing to pay above asking price, and ready to close quickly. The terms were perfect, and they seemed genuinely excited about the house. It gave me a sense of peace to know that someone would be moving in, someone who would appreciate the home for what it was. I accepted their offer. The countdown to the sale was now on. As the closing date approached, I couldn't help but think of all the memories that would remain behind. The first Christmas with Elizabeth in this house, the quiet evenings we spent on the porch watching the sunset, the laughter of our children as they grew up. Those memories were etched into the very walls, but now they were just that, memories. The house would soon belong to someone else. Meanwhile, Sarah and Michael's attempts to contact me had intensified. I knew they were watching the listing, waiting for me to back down, to give in. Their calls became more frequent, their messages more urgent. Michael's texts went from condescending to aggressive. "You're making a mistake," he wrote one evening. "You don't know what you're doing, Dad. We're trying to help you. This house is too much for you. You'll regret this." But I didn't regret it. Not for a second. This wasn't about the house anymore. This was about proving a point. I had spent my life building something beautiful with Elizabeth, and I wouldn't let it be taken by people who didn't respect it, didn't respect us. One evening, as I sat in the living room, the house eerily quiet without the familiar hum of Elizabeth's presence. I received a call from Mr. Davies. He had been working on the legal side of things, making sure everything was airtight. "We sent ready to move forward with the next step," he said. "The restraining order is in place and we set the final demand letters. If Sarah and Michael don't set comply, we set file the necessary paperwork for a court date." It was the final piece of the puzzle. I had control of the house, and now I had control of my legal standing as well. Sarah and Michael could no longer enter the property without my permission. They could no longer make repairs or alterations. This wasn't just about protecting the house. It was about sending a message. But the pressure was mounting. I could feel it. Every day felt like a countdown. The house was in escrow, and I knew that once the sale closed, it would all be over. There was no turning back now. But then, something unexpected happened. Sarah showed up at the house again. This time she wasn't alone. She had Michael with her. They stood at the end of the driveway, their faces tight with frustration. I didn't answer their calls, but they knew where I was. They knew I wouldn't back down. They approached the front door, and I stood there watching them through the window. For a moment I almost felt sorry for them. They had tried to manipulate me, to bully me into giving up the one thing I loved more than anything in the world. They had underestimated me, and now they were standing at the door of a home they had no right to. They rang the bell, but I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I had already made my decision. I didn't owe them anything. I stayed silent, watching from behind the curtains as they finally turned and walked away. This time they didn't call. They didn't send any more messages. It was over. The house was mine until the sale closed, and after that it would be someone else's. The chapter was closing, but I had won. I had stood my ground, and I wasn't the victim anymore. They had lost. The weeks leading up to the closing day were a whirlwind of paperwork, meetings, and quiet reflection. It felt like I was in the eye of a storm, calm on the surface, but underneath everything was in motion. I had taken control of my life and my future. But as the closing date approached, I couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah and Michael would come back with one last attempt to change my mind. The pressure I'd felt earlier had shifted. Now it was more of a quiet anticipation. I had done everything I could to protect myself, and I had the legal backing to make sure nothing could go wrong. The house was in escrow, and the young couple I had accepted the offer from was eager to move in. But Sarah and Michael, they were still trying to claw their way back into my life, into my house. It started with subtle attempts, texts, emails, calls. Michael Sepp's messages were dripping with fake concern. "Dad, you don't know what you're doing. You're making a huge mistake. This isn't what Mom would have wanted." Those words hit harder than I expected. My mind flashed to the days when Elizabeth and I would sit together talking about our hopes and dreams for the future. She had always been the anchor, the calm in the storm. I could almost hear her voice telling me I was doing the right thing. This wasn't about betrayal or vengeance. It was about standing up for the life we had built, for the memories that no one could take away. Still, the messages kept coming. Sarah Sipp's texts were less aggressive, more pleading. "Dad, we Sipp are worried about you. This isn't Sipp you. This house is too much for you. Please talk to us." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Every word they said felt like an attempt to break me, to make me feel like I was the one in the wrong. I had no intention of letting them win. I had already made the hardest decision of my life by standing up to them, and now I wasn't going to let them shake me. But then the phone call came. It was from Mr. Davies, and his voice was more serious than I had ever heard it. "James, I need you to be aware of something," he said. "I've just received a report from your attorney that Sarah and Michael have hired a new lawyer. They're planning to contest the sale of the house, claiming that they have a legal right to it based on some kind of verbal agreement. They're going to fight you in court." I could feel the blood drain from my face. This wasn't over yet. They were desperate, and I knew they'd stop at nothing to get what they thought was rightfully theirs. But I wasn't backing down. Not now. Not after everything I had gone through. "We shall handle it," Mr. Davies continued, his voice steady. "I've already got a team working on this. We shall fight them in court if we have to, but I don't let them think it will come to that. You have everything you need to prove your case." I hung up the phone and sat there, in the same chair Elizabeth and I had sat in countless times, looking out the window. The house felt more like a fortress than ever before, but the weight of the upcoming battle hung over me like a storm cloud. I wasn't afraid. I had the law on my side. But I couldn't help but wonder how far Sarah and Michael were willing to go. Over the next few days, I heard nothing from them. No more calls, no more texts. It was like they had disappeared. I didn't know if it was because they were gathering their resources for the court fight, or if they had simply given up. I wasn't sure which one scared me more. The day of the closing arrived. The paperwork was finalized. The contract signed. I had spent weeks preparing, gathering every document, every shred of evidence to make sure this deal would go through without a hitch. As I sat at the table in the real estate office, my hands gripped the pen, ready to sign the papers that would seal the deal. The house, my home, would officially be sold to the young couple. It was bittersweet, but it was the right thing to do. The moment I signed the papers, I felt a sense of finality wash over me. It was done. The house was no longer mine, but the battle had taken a toll. I had fought for what was mine, and in the process I had learned something about myself. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a survivor. As the final transaction was processed, I walked out of the office, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. But just as I was stepping into my car, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. I'm sorry, Dad. I was wrong. Please forgive me. I stared at the screen for a long moment, the words burning into my mind. She was sorry? After everything? After all the lies, all the manipulation? Could it really be that easy? But I didn't reply. I couldn't. I had given her every chance to make things right. She had chosen the path of greed, of entitlement, and now it was too late to go back. As I drove away from the office, I glanced back at the house for the last time. It was no longer mine. But in that moment, I realized something important. I had regained control of my life. The house had been a symbol of my past, but now it was just a chapter I could close. I had a future waiting for me, and it didn't include Sarah and Michael. It was mine to write. The final legal battle had begun, and I could feel the tension building with every passing day. I had won the house, but I knew it wasn't over yet. Sarah and Michael weren't the kind of people to give up easily. They were relentless, determined, and they would stop at nothing to get what they thought was owed to them. The letters had stopped coming. The calls had ceased, but I knew they were preparing for the inevitable confrontation. Their lawyer, a smooth-talking young man, had already filed paperwork to contest the sale, claiming that the house should be theirs due to some vague verbal agreement. The gall of them to think that they could take what wasn't theirs with no legal standing at all. It was infuriating. But I was prepared. Mr. Davies had filed all the necessary motions, and the court date was set. It was a cold gray morning when I walked into the King County Courthouse, my heart steady but my mind racing. I wasn't worried about the legal outcome. I knew I had the law on my side. The documentation, the evidence, everything was in place. But the emotional weight of what was about to unfold was still there. This wasn't just a legal dispute. It was a battle for my dignity, for the home that had been my sanctuary for decades. As I sat in the courtroom, I couldn't help but feel a sense of surreal finality. The room was sterile, filled with the quiet hum of low voices. The judge, a woman with stern eyes and silver hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, sat at the bench reviewing the case. Davies sat beside me, calm and composed, his fingers tapping lightly on the desk in front of him. He had been my rock through this whole process, never wavering, always offering sound advice. I knew I could trust him to guide me through this. I looked over at the other side of the courtroom. Sarah and Michael were seated there, their lawyer standing beside them. Michael looked different. His usual polished exterior had cracked. His suit, once sharp and confident, now seemed out of place, like a costume he couldn't quite wear. Sarah, though, still wore her mask of detachment. She didn't look at me, and I didn't look at her. The judge called the court to order, and the proceedings began. Their lawyer was the first to speak, presenting their side of the case with all the rehearsed lines of a man who thought he could manipulate the truth. He claimed that there had been a verbal agreement between me and Sarah and Michael, that Elizabeth and I had promised them the house in exchange for their care in our old age. A lie, a fabricated story they had created to justify their greed. I couldn't help but feel a surge of anger as he spoke. The audacity of it, they had taken my grief, my love for Elizabeth, and turned it into a weapon. They had tried to turn my home into a pawn in their game of entitlement. But I wouldn't let them get away with it, not anymore. Mr. Davies stood up to present my side, and I could see the difference immediately. His calm, measured tone was a stark contrast to their frantic, desperate claims. Your Honor, Mr. Davies began, we have presented documentation proving that Mr. Collins is the sole owner of the property in question. The deed to the house has been in his name since 1983, and there is no evidence of any verbal agreement between him and the defendants. In fact, we have evidence that they were planning to take control of the property long before Mr. Collins's wife passed away. Their claims are not only baseless, but they are also a clear case of financial abuse. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the room. The judge looked over the documents he had presented, her eyes flicking between the pages and the defendants. I could see the flicker of disbelief in her gaze as she read through the incriminating texts and receipts. The fake contractor's quote, the unauthorized repairs, and the email from Sarah to Michael, detailing how I was a burden and how they had planned to take the house once Elizabeth was gone. It was all there. Every piece of evidence they thought they could hide, every lie they had told was now laid bare for the judge to see. Mr. Davies didn't stop there. He continued presenting the evidence, the final blow coming when he played a video recording of Michael bragging about how they would get the old man to sign over the deed. The look on Sarah's face was one of sheer shock as the words echoed through the courtroom. Michael's usual confidence had evaporated, replaced by a look of panic. The room was silent as the video finished, the impact of their own words crushing them. The judge turned to Sarah and Michael Sepp's lawyer, her voice steady and firm. Your clients have presented no evidence to support their claims. Their behavior throughout this case has been a clear example of financial manipulation and elder abuse. I find in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Collins. The words hit me like a wave. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear them until they were finally said. The house, my home, was mine. No one could take it from me. I had won. As the judge's gavel came down, I looked over at Sarah and Michael. For the first time, they didn't have an answer. They didn't have a plan, they had lost, and I could see the weight of that loss settling over them. They tried to plead with the judge, to ask for some kind of leniency, but it was too late. Their arrogance had caught up with them. The game was over. I stood up, my legs feeling steady despite the weight that had been lifted from my shoulders. The fight had been long, but it was worth it. I had fought for my home, for my legacy, and for the memory of Elizabeth. And I had won. The aftermath of the court ruling was swift, and the consequences for Sarah and Michael were far-reaching. It wasn't just the legal defeat that weighed on them. It was the collapse of everything they had worked so hard to build on lies and manipulation. I had expected them to fight until the very end, but in the end it wasn't the court that dealt the final blow. It was the very foundation of their lives that crumbled beneath them. A few days after the judgment, I received an unexpected phone call. It was from Carol, Elizabeth's best friend, who had been there for me through everything. She had known both Sarah and Michael, but she had always been skeptical of their motives. Carol was a retired social worker, a no-nonsense woman who had seen all kinds of people come and go. She didn't mince words. James, I just heard the news, she said, her voice thick with concern. Sarah and Michael are in deep trouble. Their friends and family are turning on them. Word got out about what they tried to do, and now they suffer being shunned. People are talking, and it suffers not pretty. I felt a sense of satisfaction, but it was bittersweet. I had never wanted to see them suffer. Not really, but I had wanted them to understand the consequences of their actions, to feel the weight of their entitlement and greed. They didn't said just lose the house, James. Carol continued. Michael lost his job. His boss found out about the case, and he said's been fired. The company can afford to have someone involved in a scandal like that. It was a moment of poetic justice. Michael had used his position as a financial analyst to try and manipulate me into giving up my home. Now he had been exposed for the very things he had tried to hide. The humiliation of it all was enough to make anyone question their choices. And Sarah? I asked, already knowing the answer. Her art gallery is losing customers. People are leaving bad reviews online, and her reputation is shot. She sips no longer the darling of the social scene. The lies have caught up with her, and now everyone knows the truth. It wasn't just the financial hit or the damage to their reputations that affected Sarah and Michael. It was the fact that they had lost the support of the people they had once relied on. Their friends, their social circle, their families. They had all begun to distance themselves. The very people who had once looked up to them now saw them for what they were: opportunistic, selfish, and manipulative. The bitterness I had felt earlier in the case was now replaced by a sense of closure. This wasn't about revenge. It never had been. It was about teaching them that there were consequences for their actions, that entitlement was a dangerous thing to nurture, and that no one, especially family, should ever be treated as disposable. A week after the court ruling, I got a letter from Sarah. The envelope was thick, and I could feel the weight of it as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The words scrawled hastily across it. "Dad," it began. "I said I'm sorry for everything. I didn't set understand what I was doing, and I was wrong. Michael and I both were. I don't set expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know that I regret everything. Please know that I love you, and I never meant to hurt you." I sat there for a long time, staring at the letter. There was an emptiness in her words, a sense of finality that made it impossible for me to feel anything but exhaustion. She had apologized, but it was too little, too late. The damage had been done. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The apology felt like a desperate attempt to salvage something they had lost. But I had already moved on. I had already taken back control of my life, and that was enough. A few days later, I saw Sarah and Michael driving down the street in their car, their faces drawn, their postures stiff. They didn't stop to talk to me, didn't even make eye contact, but I could feel the weight of their failure hanging in the air between us. They had come to take what wasn't theirs, and in the end, they had lost everything. The new owners of the house moved in soon after the sale was finalized. A young couple with children, eager to make the house their own. Watching them carry boxes through the front door, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The house had a new life now. It wasn't just a symbol of loss anymore. It was a symbol of new beginnings, of growth, of the future. It was no longer tied to the pain and betrayal I had felt. It was simply a house again, a home for someone else. The days following the closing of the house felt strange. The grief that had gripped me after Elizabeth's passing was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but now there was something else. An unexpected peace. The house, the one place that had been the center of my life for so long, was no longer mine, but I had reclaimed something far more important: my dignity, my control, and my ability to move forward. As the holiday season approached, I found myself reflecting on how far I had come. I had survived the darkest days of my life, lost my wife, and been betrayed by my own daughter. Yet here I was, standing tall, stronger than I had ever been before. I had fought not just for the house, but for my right to live on my own terms, to not be pushed aside for someone else's gain. I had also made a decision: I wouldn't let the bitterness of the past linger. The lessons I had learned, however painful, were valuable. I wasn't going to let the pain of betrayal dictate the rest of my life. Instead, I would use it as fuel to build something new, a life on my own terms. I decided to donate a portion of the sales proceeds to a charity that helped seniors avoid financial abuse. It wasn't much, but it was something. I wanted to turn the negative energy from the battle over the house into something positive. It was my way of ensuring that what had happened to me wouldn't happen to anyone else. But the real test came when I received a letter from Sarah. It was another attempt at reaching out, another attempt to rebuild what was broken. But I was done with the games, done with the manipulation. I wasn't interested in trying to fix what could never be repaired. The letter was simple. "Dad, I know you still never forgive me, but I stem sorry. I stem lost so much. I lost you, I lost Michael, and I lost my chance to make things right. I just wanted you to know that I stem sorry." I folded the letter slowly and placed it in the drawer next to the table. It was too late. The house was gone. The years of bitterness and lies had already sealed the fate of our relationship. I had forgiven her a long time ago. I had to, but forgiveness wasn't the same as forgetting. That night, I sat on the porch, looking out at the city. The new house I had moved into was smaller than the old one, but it was mine. It was a new beginning. I didn't need Sarah's approval or validation. I had done the hard work of letting go, and now I was free. The next morning, as I went for my daily walk, I ran into Carol, who had been a steady presence throughout all of this. She had always believed in me, even when I couldn't believe in myself. "I heard about the letter," she said. As we walked together, her voice warm with understanding. "You know, James, sometimes it's sentiment's not about forgiveness. It's sentiment's about setting boundaries. You stub done that. You stub shown them that their behavior has consequences. You stub free now." I nodded, feeling a quiet sense of pride in her words. She was right. It wasn't about forgiveness. It was about making sure I never allowed myself to be treated like that again. I had found my peace, my justice, not in revenge or bitterness, but in taking control of my life and not letting anyone dictate my worth. My past, with all its love and loss, would always be a part of me, but I was no longer tethered to it. I was free to create a future on my own terms. It was the first Christmas without Elizabeth, and yet for the first time in months I felt the stirrings of something I hadn't expected. Hope. The house was sold, the fight was over, and I had won not just against Sarah and Michael, but against the overwhelming grief that had threatened to consume me. The house, my home for decades, was now a part of someone else's story, but my story wasn't over. I had more chapters to write. The condo I had moved into was small, a fraction of the size of the house I had shared with Elizabeth, but it was mine. I'd always dreamed of a cozy, quiet space for myself after retirement, somewhere I could relax and enjoy the fruits of my labor. The timing had been difficult, but it had forced me to confront my future, not just my past. I spent the weeks following the sale, settling into my new life, making small changes, finding comfort in the quiet spaces. I had sold most of the furniture from the old house, but I kept a few things, old photographs, Elizabeth's favorite chair, the painting we had bought on our trip to Italy. These pieces, these fragments of my past, grounded me as I stepped forward into this new chapter. One evening, as I was sitting by the window watching the snow fall gently over the city, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Carol, and I smiled before reading it. We had stayed in touch throughout all of this, and her words had often been a source of comfort. "James, I know you said you're doing well, but I wanted to remind you that I set you here whenever you need me. I set you proud of you. You such done something few people can do, walk away from the past and claim your future. I can such wait to see where you go next." Her words echoed in my mind as I sat there, the soft glow of the streetlights outside casting a peaceful light on the room. The journey had been painful, losing Elizabeth, enduring the betrayal of my own daughter, and fighting for the home that had meant everything to me. But through it all I had found strength in unexpected places. I had learned what it meant to stand on my own 2 feet, to no longer be defined by my past or my relationships with people who didn't have my best interests at heart. In the weeks that followed, I began to get involved in local charities, volunteering at shelters and participating in programs that supported seniors in need. I found joy in helping others, in using my own experiences to guide and inspire those who had faced similar struggles. It was a reminder that even in the most difficult times, there was always an opportunity to give back, to make a difference. I also reconnected with old friends, people I had lost touch with over the years. We shared stories of the past, of times long gone but never forgotten. It was comforting to hear their laughter, to know that despite everything, life had a way of moving forward, of healing even the deepest wounds. One day, as I was walking through the park, I ran into an old colleague from my architecture days, Robert. We hadn't seen each other in years, but it was as if no time had passed at all. We caught up over coffee, talking about old projects and new ones, about the world of architecture and how it had changed over the years. It felt good to reconnect, to know that I still had something to offer, even outside of the work I had done all my life. As we parted ways, Robert gave me a firm handshake. You sep been through a lot, James, he said, but you sep are not done yet. There's sep's a whole world out there, waiting for you to take it on. His words struck a chord in me. It was a reminder that life didn't stop when you hit a setback. There was always more ahead, more to experience, more to build, and for the first time in a long time, I felt excited about the possibilities. I spent the rest of the year focusing on my own growth. I began taking small trips to places I had always wanted to visit, starting with a peaceful retreat in the mountains. The solitude and the beauty of nature gave me the clarity I had been seeking. I had once been consumed by grief, but now I was finding joy in the simple things: the sound of birds chirping in the morning, the feel of the earth beneath my feet, the quiet moments of reflection. On New Year's Eve, as I sat alone in my condo, I raised a glass to the past and to the future. The past had shaped me, but it would no longer define me. I had learned that no matter what life threw at me, I had the strength to face it head on. The battle for my home had been difficult, but it had given me the courage to rebuild, to reclaim my life. As the clock struck midnight, I looked out the window at the fireworks lighting up the sky. It was a new year, a new chapter, and I was ready for whatever came next. Months had passed since the court ruling, and while life had slowly returned to a sense of normalcy, the lessons of the past remained with me, etched into my soul. The final chapter of this painful saga had been written, but I knew the story wasn't over. I had come to understand that the battle for the house was more than just a fight for property. It was a fight for my dignity, my identity, and the legacy Elizabeth and I had built together. As the spring flowers began to bloom, I found myself reflecting more on the events that had unfolded. I had won, but it wasn't the kind of victory that left me feeling triumphant. It left me with a quiet sense of closure, a deep, unsettling understanding that life wasn't always fair, that people you love could betray you in the most unexpected ways. But through it all, I had learned something valuable. I had the power to stand up for myself, to fight back when necessary, and to protect what mattered most to me. I had heard nothing from Sarah and Michael since the court case. No more texts, no more letters, just silence. It was as if they had vanished from my life completely. It should have been a relief, but instead, it felt like a void. The house, the family, the memories, all of it was gone, and all that remained was a quiet emptiness. One afternoon, I received a letter from a lawyer I hadn't expected to hear from. It was addressed to me, and the envelope had an official-looking seal. My heart skipped a beat as I opened it, wondering if Sarah and Michael were trying to launch some new legal action. But as I read the letter, I realized it was something different entirely. The letter was from Michael's former employer. He had been fired from his job as a financial analyst, as Carol had told me. But there was more to it. The company had conducted a thorough investigation into the events surrounding the lawsuit, and had found that Michael had violated company policy by using his professional position to manipulate family members for personal gain. The letter stated that Michael had been disbarred from working in finance, and his career had been permanently tarnished.
I didn't feel vindicated. It wasn't what I had wanted.
But there was a sense of finality to it. The very thing Michael had used to try and manipulate me, the thing he had relied on to deceive others, had been taken from him. He had tried to ruin my life, but in the end it was his own life that had been ruined. As I sat there reading the letter in the quiet of my condo, I couldn't help but think of the bigger picture. This wasn't just about one man's greed or one woman's entitlement. This was about understanding the value of integrity, of honesty, of loyalty. It was a lesson learned the hard way, but it was a lesson that would stay with me for the rest of my life. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. My new life, one built on the foundations of independence, began to take shape. I started meeting new people, old friends, new acquaintances, people who saw me for who I was, not who they thought I should be. I volunteered more, spent more time in the community, and found solace in the small moments. The first snowfall of the season, a cup of coffee with a friend, a quiet evening spent reading in my chair. I had reached a place of peace. I was no longer a victim. I had fought for my home, my legacy, and now I was free to live my life on my own terms. The past no longer had the power to haunt me. The house was gone, but I was still here, still standing, still living. Then, one afternoon, a familiar face appeared at my door. It was Carol. She had been such a steady presence throughout all of this, always there when I needed someone to talk to. I heard the news, she said, her voice soft. About the letter, about Michael. I wanted to check in and see how you were doing. I smiled as I invited her in. We sat together, sipping tea in the living room, the same one where Elizabeth and I had spent so many quiet evenings, but now it felt different. The room was still, peaceful, full of the memories that made me who I was. Carol, I said quietly. I said learned a lot over these past months. It wasn't Sep just about the house or the money. It was about standing up for what Sep's mine, for who I am, and not letting anyone define me. Not Sarah, not Michael, not anyone. She nodded, her eyes warm with understanding. You Seb done well, James. You Seb learned a powerful lesson, and now you get to live the life you Seb earned. As I looked out the window at the city below, I realized how far I had come. The house may have been sold, the battle may have been won, but the most important thing I had reclaimed was my own sense of self. I had found my voice, my strength, and my freedom. The past was behind me, and the future was wide open. I was ready for whatever came next.